Welcome back, everyone, to the latest in our Sunset series. We've had a little break over Easter, but this is the first in our next sort of phase of Sunset series. So it's lovely to see so many faces. We've got a good contingent, I think, from is it the Westmoreland Federation of WIs, but I can see lots and lots of people joining us from Kendal and Sedbergh. And up as far as Kirby Stevens. So lots of people who are kind of hearing curlews as part of your daily lives, which is brilliant. So yeah, tonight we're talking about Morecambe Bay Partnership's work on local breeding curlews. So we have Amy Hopley and Susanna Bleakley are going to be co-running the talk tonight, and I'll introduce them a little bit more properly in a few minutes, but thank you both of you for agreeing to do this talk tonight. So I think some of you will know me, some of you won't, but I'm Tom Burdett, and I'm the chair of Morecambe Bay Partnership, which is a volunteer role, but it's been brilliant to just be involved in this fabulous series of talks. We're a small charity. Obviously we work all around the bay, from Barrow down to Fleetwood, and I think you'll be aware of the various sort of parts to our work. So we're talking about birds and nature tonight, but obviously we're also the creators of the Bay Cycleway. We've got arts projects, archaeology and heritage, beach cleans, oral histories, working on memories and stories, and opening up access for this wonderful area in which so many of us live. As well as myself, we've got Susanna, who I think you know is our chief executive, and Amy, who manages our nature programs. But we've also got Claire, who is our archaeologist, our heritage officer, but also is our kind of technical and digital wizard. So she tends to be behind the scenes. But to curlew, so obviously, as we've been chatting about as you've been joining, the bay is enormously important for curlews, and I think we're particularly familiar, I guess, with the huge population that comes here in the winter. And in the winter, it's one of the largest concentrations of curlew anywhere in the UK that come to feed here. But we know that they're in a really catastrophic decline worldwide. The populations have really crashed in this country as well, and their future is really on a knife edge. And so a lot of that is around their breeding habitat. And that really is what the project, the Morecambe Bay Partnership, have been leading on, and what tonight's talk is about. So the work that we do with local volunteers, and I know a lot of you are here tonight, so thank you so much for joining us. And actually we couldn't do it either without working with the local farming community as well, on whose land the birds are breeding. The work that we do, we don't get external funding for, so we're very reliant on donations to keep it going, particularly obviously for things like the fencing that goes up around the curlew nests when they're found. So if you are able to make a donation tonight, if you're inspired by what you're hearing, then there will be a link in the chat for online donations. And we had some really generous giving last year that not only helped us to sustain breeding curlews and keep the program going last year, but has really enabled us to carry on with it this year. So it is a vital part of our work, and it does depend on those donations. So thank you, anyone here who's already given to the Curlew project. I'll just hand over to Amy, is going to start, and then Susanna will be doing the second half of our talk. So Amy, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. I'll just share my screen with everyone. Hopefully you can all see that now. So the thing that we asked when we started was, what does a curlew mean to you? And from your responses in the chat and from some of the people who spoke, just as we were waiting for people to arrive, the thing that they associated most with the curlew is this. So hopefully that made some of you smile and brought back some good memories. But yeah, so the curlew is probably best known for its call. So even though I know a lot of you will be familiar with what a curlew is, we'll take it right back to basics in case there's anyone listening who isn't sure what a curlew is. So a curlew in general is a word that refers to any of the large waders in the family of waders called Numenius. Now, Numenius means new moon, and that is in reference to the long curved bills, which can be seen in each of the 9 species of curlew that can be found all over the world. Here in the UK, we actually have 2 species of curlews that we get that can be seen around the UK. And the first of these is the Wimbrel. They are slightly the rarer type of curlew that we get in this country, and they're what we call a passage migrant. So a passage migrant stops off here in Morecambe Bay during the spring on its way back up north to breed in places like Iceland, Greenland, and then they can be seen again in the autumn as they travel down south, very sensibly, I think, to spend the winter in the nice warm climate of West Africa. So Wimbrels do breed in the UK, but only right up north on the Scottish Islands. So we won't talk about them for the rest of the talk, but it's just interesting to know that we do have another type of curlew here in the UK. But the second species of curlew, and the one that I'm sure all of you know, and the one that has that beautiful bubbling call that we heard at the start, is the Eurasian curlew, to give it its proper name. So I'm sure that the Eurasian curlew is familiar to all of you. And as I say, the call brings back some hopefully happy memories, but definitely it's a very evocative call that this bird has. Now, curlews are the biggest wading bird that we have in the UK, and they are certainly one of the most distinctive, not only due to their size and their very distinctive call, but also because of these long down-curved beaks that we have. In the winter, you might see big groups of them gathered at roost sites. And during this time, what they're doing on the coast is they're basically spending all the time eating and sleeping. So they're building up their energy reserves by feeding in the mud and sands of the bay. And they use their long curved beaks to probe deep in the mud for lugworms, or to reach under rocks for the couple of crabs that haven't managed to squeeze far enough back and unfortunately get pulled out by the curlew. And I've mentioned the beaks a few times, but they are really, really impressive things. So the end of the beak is super sensitive. There's lots of nerve endings in there, and they're sensitive enough that they can locate, once they're dug into the mud or the sand, they're able to locate the lugworms or the invertebrates buried deep below. Not only this, but the beak can actually move independently. So sort of like this, like a pair of tweezers. And this helps it to extract its prey. Once it's caught hold of its prey using its beak, it picks it up and throws it back in the air and then catches it in its mouth. So as I say, it's really important. It helps the curlews get plenty of food and helps them keep their energy up through the long, dark and cold winters that we get here in the UK. Now, once the winter eventually ends and spring comes around, we start to see the curlews moving away from the coast and into the uplands and the lowlands. Now, at this time, the curlew's priorities shift from the quite nice lifestyle of eating and sleeping to a lifestyle that's slightly more busy. And this is when they start nesting and parenting. So it's right now, during the spring and the early summer, that the curlews have the hardest job of all. I'm sure some of you will agree with. The hardest job of all is to protect and to raise their families. So, like many wading birds, curlews nest on the ground. And saying that they build a nest is quite generous. What they do is they basically hollow out a basic little nook in the ground in which they lay their eggs. Now, during the breeding season, the curlews need 3 things from their habitats. And the first is a place to forage and to feed. Now, ideally, this is sort of rough, damp pasture with lots of tussocks where they can probe around in the ground for worms, for caterpillars, and the other invertebrates that make up their summer diet. They also need a place where they can nest, and this needs to be somewhere with a very specific grass height. Basically, the grass needs to be about 30 centimetres in height, so that's high enough that they can crouch down from predators, but also short enough for them to poke their head up to check the coast is clear when they need to leave the nest. They also avoid nesting too close to tall trees and shrubs because these can harbour predators like crows, foxes, or other things that would like to eat a curlew's eggs. Curlews usually lay 3 to 4 eggs, which they will incubate for about 4 weeks. And the final, this is just a picture of a curlew that we took, one of our volunteers took from a vantage point above the field. And you can just see this curlew's got a great spot with the perfect grass length. It can easily poke its head up above the grass and then crouch down again if it detects any danger. So the third thing that curlews need from their habitat is a safe place for chicks. So unlike your garden birds, chicks are very independent almost immediately after hatching. And again, unlike garden birds, they are not fed by the parents at all. Instead, they get up and out of the nest and forage for themselves. Now, obviously, a growing chick needs to get plenty to eat. So what the chicks need is a grassland or a meadow that is really rich in invertebrates to provide easy pickings for these hungry little chicks. There also should be enough cover so that the chicks can hide from predators, but the grass needs to not be so dense that a small chick can't navigate its way through. So the chicks will be running around the field for about 5 weeks, and after this time, they'll start to fly. So in a nutshell, that is what a curlew is and what a curlew needs. That's basically the biology of them, but this bird is also highly evocative for a lot of people and pops up in all sorts of cultures. Things like folktales and superstitions, religious texts and local legends. And it's also inspired many poets with its haunting and bubbling call. Unfortunately, in many stories, the curlew is a bad omen. If it's heard at sea, it can cause shipwrecks, it's said. And if heard at night, it can be an omen of death. Certainly, it's added, the curlew call has been added to many films and filmmaking to add a bit of a haunting atmosphere. In a happier tale from the Welsh mythology, it's said that a curlew saved St. Bruno from certain embarrassment one day when his prayer book accidentally washed over the side of his boat. The story tells us that the curlew picked up the prayer book from the waves, brought it to shore and laid it safely on a rock for Bruno to find when he came ashore. To show his thanks, Bruno blessed the bird and promised that the bird that curlews would always have extremely camouflaged nests so that it would be safe from egg collectors or from predators. So it would seem that we have St. Bruno to thank for all of our troubles finding the curlew's nests. So sadly, curlews are a species that are facing really catastrophic population declines. In the UK, we've lost 48% of our breeding curlew populations over the last 20 to 25 years. And in some places, this decline has been even more dramatic. Since the UK holds around a quarter of the world's population of the Eurasian curlew, these declines not only have an impact in this country, but they have an impact on the future of the species all around the world. There has been a lot of research into what is happening, why the curlews are declining, and it's thought that there are 3 main causes of decline. And these causes have been attributed to loss of habitat, increases in predator numbers, and changes in farming practices. Now, loss of habitat can vary based on whether the birds are breeding in uplands like moors or in lowlands like valleys. On the moors, habitat loss can be due to things like afforestation, which make moors unsuitable for nesting curlews. And in the lowlands, this can be loss of suitable wet meadows and invertebrate-rich grasslands. Without these places that they depend on in order to breed, there's no way for curlews to produce the next generation that will replace them when they die. Generalist predators are also a huge problem. So a generalist predator is something like a crow, a fox, a badger, or even a hedgehog who will ransack a nest and eat eggs, or even small chicks if they find a nest. Curlews have evolved, along with the help of St. Bruno, to be extremely secretive about the location of their nests. They're very aware that the beady eyes of predators can easily follow them back to their nest, so they work hard to disguise its location. And they do things like landing far away from the nest and sneaking back by foot, crouching down low under the grass so the predators can't see them. And they make sure they feed very far away from the nest site. However, with foxes and crows now far outnumbering the number of curlews, it becomes more and more difficult for the nest location to remain a secret. And finally, the changes in farming practices mean that the nesting sites that may have been used by curlews for generation after generation are no longer a safe haven. In the lowlands, where the curlews breed, like here in South Cumbria, the curlews like to nest in silage fields or hay meadows, and that's because of the long grass providing the cover that we discussed earlier. Now, traditionally, these fields would have been cut late in the summer when the chicks had fledged or had at least hatched so that they could move around and escape the cutting. However, advances in technology mean that the fields are cut earlier and more frequently during the breeding season. And when the grass is cut before the eggs have hatched, the eggs in the nest obviously are unable to escape, and the eggs will always be destroyed by the machinery. When the adult birds then try again, they often see the same result, with the eggs being destroyed by the silage machines. So these three factors have really detrimental effects on the breeding success of the curlew. Since these birds are long-lived, on around 11 years on average, although some birds can survive for 20 or even 30 years, the effects of breeding failures were not immediately apparent. So this is because breeding failure does not have an immediate effect on the population. As the older birds die and there are no new generations to replace them, we see a decline in the numbers of birds returning to breed each year. So that means that suddenly the moors and the valleys that were once filled with the calls of breeding curlews in the spring are becoming quieter and quieter. And it's important that we take notice of what is starting to not be there. So it's a real threat that the curlew may disappear from our landscape. And we know this because it has happened before. So this is a corncrake, and corncrakes were once a common farmland bird, and they have a really distinctive call that has pretty much disappeared from our landscape. With the unusual habit of calling at night, between midnight and 3 a.m, and with up to 20,000 calls per night, it's unsurprising that many people had been kept awake by the sound of the curlew and were familiar with it. But the rapid declines, similar to what is happening to the curlew, have pushed the corncrakes right to the edge of existence in the UK, and the remaining populations are small and isolated. And sadly, their call is missed only by the few people who can still remember them. Our curlews are in a very real danger of following the fate of the corncrake, and so are many other species, especially the wading birds that are disappearing from our landscape. It is a real and really frightening possibility that the future generations of humans will never hear the magical call of the curlew, and it will become another species that can only be remembered in folklore or in dusty museum specimens. So clearly, we do not want this to happen. We want to keep hold of our curlews. And the excellent news is that there is action happening from communities, from farmers, and from conservation organisations all over the country to keep the call of the curlew alive all around the UK. And we are delighted to be involved in this fight to protect our curlews here in South Cumbria. And Susanna is going to speak in a moment about what is happening to protect our local curlews.
In this beautiful South Lakeland Valley, we think we have about a dozen pairs of breeding curlew. And the biggest problem we have with these curlews is finding their nests. Here is a lovely nest. I took 2 steps back from it, literally 2 steps back from it and took this photograph. And I actually can't find the nest in this photograph myself. I have tried by looking at the pattern of dandelions. I've tried very hard by looking at the pattern of dandelions and seeing if I can locate the nest. But sadly, I am failing to locate the nest. And that, for those of us who are trying to conserve curlews and trying to do some active curlew conservation, one of the biggest challenges we face is finding the nests. If we can find the nests, we've got a chance of doing some interventions that might help us protect those nests. Amy's already told you that they're very secretive about their nests, but also the nests are very well disguised and very hard to find. If we are lucky enough to be able to locate a nest, we can, for instance, put an electric fence around it. And an electric fence will give that nest and the bird that is sitting on that nest, it will give them protection from ground predators like badgers and foxes. And it will also, if the nest is in a field where a farmer might be working, it will mean that it effectively provides a marker or an area of territory where the farmer will probably not want to go. Because for those of the volunteers who've been looking to see if they can find curlew nests, if they have a suspicion, they might be looking from the road or looking from the field margins, looking from footpaths and roads around the edges of fields. If they have a suspicion that there's something going on, the first thing they would do is have a chat with the farmer, talk to the farmer, explain, ask for permission perhaps to look inside the field and to enter the field and to see if they can find the nest. And I absolutely have to take my hat off to all of the farmers. The farmers have been incredibly accommodating. Some of them, I would say, even have been wildly enthusiastic about work to try and look after curlews. And it is really not something the farmer wants to do. The farmer does not want to be working in his field, rolling his field or putting till on his field if he knows there's a nest there. But he can't not work in his entire field. So if we can identify where the nest is, then that gives him a small target area to request that he doesn't do activities in that part of the field. It's quite a palaver to put an electric fence up. You need quite a lot of equipment. You need a strimmer to prevent the electric wire shorting against the grass. You need a battery, you need the poles, you need the wire. And of course, we always try and do it as quickly as possible. The wheelbarrow is jolly helpful to push it all in. So these are two of our curlew volunteers about to set out to put an electric fence around an identified nest. And this is the classic picture of what a curlew looks like when they're sitting on the nest. Now, close to like this, it looks really easy to see that bird. But I had the experience just very, very recently of going to a nest that had been recently fenced. We were doing some work around that fence. We were just revisiting that fence about 2 weeks after the fence had gone up to make sure that the fence was still in good nick, to trim the grass around the outside to make sure it wasn't shorting. And what would normally happen in that circumstance when you go very close to a nest is you would expect the bird to fly up, and that didn't happen. So before we even started to trim and change the battery and so forth and do the maintenance on the fence, we just looked inside that area to see if we could see what had happened. Why had the bird not flown up when we approached? I think we were fearing the worst. We were fearing that maybe the nest had already been lost, maybe it had already been predated, maybe something had gone wrong, maybe the bird had abandoned. And after a bit of searching, we sort of were confused and decided maybe we'd got it wrong. But using modern technology and using a GPS location, having been spending a few minutes actually sort of looking ourselves in an area where we knew there was a nest, but we couldn't see the bird, using GPS, we managed to find this bird here. And she was absolutely sticky. She was stuck tight to that nest and she was hunkered down and she was invisible to me. I had spent 2 or 3 minutes in the centre of that fenced area. I knew there should have been a nest there. I couldn't see the nest, I couldn't see the bird, and it was only with the technology, with my eyes, I couldn't find it. It was only with technology that we were able to find that bird. So hats off to her. She was being a very, very good parent. But what I'm trying to tell you here is the story of just how hard it is to find their nests. Our biggest problem in conservation work is trying to find their nests. And what we've done this year is we've brought the volunteers together a little bit earlier than usual. And we've gone out when the birds were just sort of pairing up. So earlier than they would be expecting to mate and earlier than they would be actually nesting. And we did surveys with a number of volunteers in this valley all at the same time. And through that process, we were able to see target areas where there were pairs of birds hanging around. And because we had a number of volunteers in different parts of the valley all at the same time, it gave us for the first time a really good sense of just how many pairs of birds there were in our valley. And it's a result of that. I remember standing on one road and I could see one pair of birds on one side of the road in a field and another pair of birds on the other side of the road. I could see 4 birds at once. So I knew for a fact that in that particular area, there were 4 birds. I drove half a mile down the road. I'd been watching out. There were no birds flying over me. And in another field further down, I saw 2 birds. So I was pretty confident then that we had target areas for looking for 3 nests. And that was how this year we have been more successful. So this year we have so far identified 6, so half perhaps of the nests that are. We think there are a dozen breeding pairs, and so far this year we have identified 6 of the nests. So that's about half. And the collaboration and the cooperation from the farmers has been outstanding. They have been absolutely terrific. And 5 of those nests have now been electric fenced to protect those nests from ground predators. And a 6th nest sort of over the other side of town in another nearby location, just a few miles away. So we have got 6 electric fences at the moment around nesting birds. And we're trying to find out more all the time about the birds. And so this year, for the first time, we're using these things. Now, these are, what you can see in that picture is a bit of technical stuff and 2 6-inch nails. And on the top of those 2 6-inch nails, we have glued thermal measuring devices. They're called eye buttons or thermal data loggers. So on the top of those 6-inch nails are these little buttons. They look a little bit like a battery. We've covered them over in black tape so they don't look too shiny in the nest. And those 6-inch nails get pushed into the bottom of the nest and they provide a constant record of temperature in that nest. And that therefore gives us a little bit more of a clue about the outcomes of those nests. What we suspect is that many of the nests will fail. So this is a kind of a job of anxiety and heartache, trying to look after curlew nests and curlew eggs. But by deploying these thermal loggers, we can hopefully retrieve the loggers soon after either the nest is lost or hatching, and we can look at the signature that we get back. So if there was a predation event, the way you do this is you put 2 loggers in. So you put one in the very bottom of the nest, flush with the cup of the nesting material, and you put one nearby, which you call the ambient logger. And then you can compare those 2 temperature signals. So the blue one here was from inside the nest, and the orange one was the ambient temperature. And where you see that sudden drop in temperature, that shows you that this nest has been predated. So that's what you look for. That would show you a predation event. If you get a pattern like this, where the control logger and the nest logger effectively start to follow one another, that would suggest an abandonment. But the hope is that we might get this, where you start to get a sort of sawtooth picture. When the chicks hatch, they usually hatch mostly around the same time, within a few hours of each other. And then what they first of all do is they sort of stretch, and they've got to get out of the egg and stretch a bit, and then they fluff up, literally their feathers fluff up and sort of dry out, and they might spend maybe 4 or 6 hours sort of around the nest site and then they will flee the nest. And that's like sort of sawtooth pattern that you're seeing there from the blue line. That would show a hatching event. And I really, really hope that I'm going to be able to come back to you at some time in the not too distant future and tell you that some of our data loggers were successfully retrieved, and that let's all hope that we get some of those hatching event outcomes. So what else can we can think about doing? I've talked about fencing a nest as a way of protection. One of the other things now that we have just started to do this year for the first time is take measurements of the eggs and to weigh the eggs to give us just a little bit more information about each nest and to give us some more data to work on, because we know so little actually about our curlews. But I've now got another question for you altogether, which is, what on earth has Elvis got to do with curlew conservation? And, well, frankly, the answer is not a great deal. But this particular Elvis is the mascot on the dashboard of some very special guys. The guys from Hawkeye Drones, who come from near Lytham St Anne's, and they worked with us last year trying something completely new that has hardly been tried elsewhere. So we're sort of really leading the front here in innovation. They were flying thermal imaging from drones, quite a large drone and a highly, highly sensitive thermal camera. And this was the kit that they were using. And from this viewpoint, they were able to fly out over an area where we knew for a fact that there was a nest. And this is what we found. So the picture on the left with the green and the brown line is the true picture, like a photograph, if you like. And what you're seeing in that picture is a silage field with the grass growing up. And the brown line is where we have effectively killed the grass by strimming it underneath the electric fence. So the brown line shows us where the electric fence is. And the curlew is sitting roughly in the middle of that field. And as you can see from the photograph, from the natural colour photograph, it's impossible to see where the bird is sitting. But if you look at the black and white image to the right, that's the image that you get from the thermal camera. Right in the middle of that image, what pops out is this white speck. It's really, really clear. It's really, really obvious. And that is where we know there is a curlew nest. And so this is us using thermal imaging to see if we can identify locations of curlew nests in silage fields. So now, thanks to the guys at Hawkeye Imaging, the drone pilots from Hawkeye, we have proven that if we fly at the right time of day, not when the ground is too hot and so forth, you can pick up the temperature of the bird. So with this as our sort of model, if we suspect there's something going on, we've seen some birds moving around in an area of 2 or 3 fields, but we haven't been lucky enough to identify exactly where that nest is, we might, using the thermal imaging and the drone pilots, be able to pick up these specks. And you don't get many of them in a field, you might just have 2 or 3. So if we can ground test those specks with the farmer's permission, that might mean it can massively improve our success in finding sitting birds on the nest. So I think Hawkeye are coming up next week. So we're hopeful that we might just pick up 1 or 2 more of those nests that we suspect in areas where we suspect they are, but we've not yet picked them up. This is a bit of an experiment, another experiment altogether. This was one of the volunteers wanted to give this a try. So I've talked about predation by ground predators such as badgers and foxes, but we also have predation by crows, which is a big problem. And one of the ideas that we had was, could we dissuade crows from eating eggs? So some very ingenious volunteers blew some hen eggs out, gave them a speckled colouring and put a mustard sauce inside them and put them out in a field and thought, well, if crows eat enough mustard sauce flavoured eggs, which they're not going to like the taste of, and they're not going to get much nutrition from, maybe they could learn to not eat eggs. Maybe we can get some good crows in future. And the first night they put it out, at first we thought it was a heron that had predated it. But when we got the camera trap footage back, there we go, a cow had come in. So now we have trained one cow not to eat blue eggs that are flavoured by mustard. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting experiment, and we might try some more of that, because actually there is quite a big crow problem. And when you talk to the experts about crows, they will tell you that actually Britain leads the way in crow population. If you compare the numbers of crows per kilometre or hectare with other European countries, Britain has way more crows than the rest of Europe. And part of the reason that is thought to be the cause of this, the reason that crows do so well here, is that there are large numbers of reared pheasants that are released. And as anybody who drives around any of the country lanes knows, pheasants have absolutely no road sense. They are prime victims for roadkill, and roadkill pheasant makes excellent crow food. And this is one of the reasons why we have way more crows than the rest of Europe. So we do have inflated numbers of crows, but predator control is always a really, really challenging subject. But this really is what we're after. Beautiful curlews sitting on their nests. And there is a curlew recording, a curlew cam, which you can watch. The people down in Shropshire at curlewcountry.org have a thing called curlew cam. And it ran last year, and those of us who started watching the curlew cam, so effectively this is a camera that is pointed at a nest. I tell you about this with hesitation because it is incredibly addictive. It is strangely and ludicrously addictive. But for those of you that can see the top of my screen, unfortunately, some of my menu bar is over the web address, but we'll put it in the chat as well. But also you could just search for curlew cam on the internet, but curlewcountry.org/curlew cam. And if you feel that you dare not lose too much time, you can literally watch a curlew sitting on her nest. And for it being a bird sitting on a nest, it is, as I say, strangely addictive. When I last looked at it, which was yesterday, it looked like this. The bird had turned their back to us, and it was raining, and it wasn't raining up here. So I thought, yeah, we're doing better than Shropshire, at least with our weather, if not with our curlew technology. But this really is what we're looking for. This really is what we're hoping for. It would be absolutely wonderful if we had some curlews chicks to share the good news about, to share the stories of in future years. This is our ambition. And the work that I have described to you, the challenges around finding a nest, for me as somebody who cares deeply about curlews and wants to try and help curlews and do curlew conservation, for me, the greatest challenge is finding the nest. For the curlew, the greatest challenge is protecting that nest. And I sort of wonder what it must feel like to be that bird, hunkered down for long hours, just looking after her nest. I've talked about volunteers. There are some volunteers on this chat with us tonight. I know I saw Barney and Eve, and I think I saw John Dodds. I think I saw Martin joined us. Angela, I haven't put your name on this, I'm sorry, but Angela Singleton as well. We've had tremendous support from some ultra keen volunteers, many of them very local to the valley that we're working in. We've had terrific support from some real curlew experts, including Bart, Harry, Ian, James and Catherine, and our huge thanks go to them. We are immensely grateful for all of the people who've been supporting our work. It would be absolutely lovely if this beautiful bird was to become something that was, again, a little more common. Huge thanks to the very many people who have donated to our campaign, many very generous donations that we've received. So huge thanks to all our curlew donors. And here is one of our local birds. This is a photograph taken by John Dodds. I absolutely love this. Thank you, John. John's one of our volunteers. And it would just be so lovely if many more of us could enjoy seeing pictures like this in our local valleys. But let's come back to this question. And I said I made it up. What would happen if they went extinct? Curlew. I don't know. We do all this work. I've talked about the work we're doing to try and keep them. And it might sound like an awful lot of work for just 12 pairs or 12 potential nests. But the curlew has been described as the poet's muse. Certainly they appear again and again in folklore and myth. They are magical birds. They have inspired artists over generations. But why? What is it? What is it that's so special about the curlew? I said to you before that I made this up, but in a sense, this is exactly how folklore and myth happens, how it starts. There are certain animals and birds that kind of seem to catch our attention, that we feel a bit differently about. I know that for me, if I see a hare, that makes the day better. If I see an otter, the day is already enormously better. There are certain animals and birds that speak to us, that we respond to in a different way. And yes, I did make this up, but for me, all of that is true. And in a sense, that's how folklore is formed. It's formed from us all having our own associations and adding meaning and sort of an extra quality to our lives by connecting a story with some part of the natural world. And so when I ask why the curlew is so important to us, I think for each of us, we have our own answer. And so there are hundreds of answers. But there is no doubt that a large part of what we love is their call. And their call is always being described as evocative. It is, indeed it is. And it's haunting and it's magical. And yes, it's evocative. But there's something about that curlew call that reaches deep into the soul. And I feel it would be an absolute tragedy if we were to lose this deep connection to our natural, to the other world. And I'm not prepared to stand by and let that be lost on my watch, not without fighting all we can to save them. And if we can win, maybe, just maybe, we'll see more photographs like this. This photograph was taken by a farmer. It's a farmer's hand, isn't it? And he'd just picked these chicks out of a field before cutting it, and he kept them in his cab until he finished. So really, it is the local farmers who are the heroes of this tale. And just look at that chick. Look at the size of those feet. How on earth do those feet fit inside the egg? The beaks on the curlew chick grow really fast, but they seem to come out of the nest with the most enormous clod-hopping feet. And I'd like to ask you all that if you're moved in the same way that I am, if you feel that the call of the curlew reaches deep into a part of your soul, then join this fight with us and join these hero farmers. And we'd be so pleased if you could make a gift to help care for the curlews so that we can hear their cries echoing across our valleys and across the shore for future generations. And we'd be so grateful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Susanna. I think we normally do a bit of a virtual clap at this point. So those of you who know your reactions, there's a clap there, or you can just do that. So thank you very much. Yeah, I think for both of you, I think in slightly different ways, your passion for these birds really comes through, and I can see it's far more than professional. It's deeply personal, this, isn't it, for both of you? So thank you so much for sharing more information, both about the birds themselves and all the incredible work that's going on to try and keep them, as you say, as part of our landscape and part of our soundscape. Right, we do have quite a few questions that have come in. You have answered some of them, I think, and I can see that particularly Barney has done a great job of trying to answer things as they've been coming up in the chat. But I'll go through them and we can maybe open it out a bit more widely, maybe than just Susanna and Amy. So I'm aware that some of the volunteers involved in the project may actually want to dive in as well, because we've just heard the poetry, and now a lot of these questions are around the practical side, I think, of the project. So I'll take the first one, I think, because it's potentially the most controversial in a way. You talked there about predator control. So you came up with your what I would call the lighthouse keeper's lunch approach of trying to put mustard on the eggs. Is there more, or what are the other techniques that could be used for predator control? How controversial is it in South Cumbria? Does anyone want to come in there just to say a little bit more about, I don't know, what is being done, what could be being done, and actually what can't be done?
I'm happy to take that. It is hugely controversial. Predator control will divide opinion. Predators are, and sort of the presence of predators in our landscape it's a really hot topic, and it's one that that generates a lot of debate and discussion. And I think we have to acknowledge that where we have, and there's an awful lot, what I would say is there's so much that we don't know about our curlews. I think that came through in the question about who sits on the eggs. You know, there's so much that we don't know about our curlews, and there's so much more we'd love to know. But where we do have evidence, and it's not from our part of the world, but where they have done really detailed studies of what is predating nests, and they do that typically by putting cameras out. So they have a camera that is looking at the nest. Where they do that, they find that 50% of the nests are lost to foxes. About another 30% are lost to crows. And then a very small number get lost to other predators, hedgehogs, stoats, sheep. We didn't believe this until we started putting cameras out, but there is quite a lot of footage of sheep eating curlew eggs. They seem to have got a bit of a taste for them. But the main predator, it seems, apart from the silage cutter, but that's a different story, the main predator is the fox, and then behind that is the crow. Within our project, we are doing nothing at the moment about foxes. We are having farmers' meetings. We haven't had one recently because of COVID and the difficulty of having meetings, but we have in the past discussed this with farmers, and there is a certain amount of activity, and we would, and in future, if we were very clear that we had a rogue fox that was taking birds on the nest or taking eggs, then we could start to talk to Natural England and others about fox control. It would have to be properly done and properly agreed with Natural England for it to be something that we would do within our project. But also there is amongst the farming community a certain enthusiasm for crow control, but always within the rules. And I don't know if Amy wanted to come in and say something more on that or the other big subjects.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said, and I'm sure everyone does, that it's a hugely complex topic, the topic of what to do about predation, and particularly, obviously, crow predation and avian predation, because no amount of electric fencing, unfortunately, is going to keep out something that can fly over to the top of the fence. And the thing to bear in mind with predator control is that if you're going to do it, you have to do it properly, and you have to take care of large numbers of crows or foxes in order to have a meaningful effect. And obviously this is very expensive. It's like monetarily expensive, but also very time expensive. And if at the moment we don't have the capacity to do that sort of predator control, and if we did do just the bits, like small bits and bobs of predator control that weren't going to have a good impact on the survival of the nests, then we're just killing things for the sake of it, really. It has to be done in a sort of whole-scale approach, in a way that's going to work, I think, or otherwise that's a waste of resources, and it's not ethical either.
And there is a case where, through working with farmers, and as I say, there is a certain enthusiasm in the farming community for crow control. If a farmer knows exactly where the nest is, and if the curlew nest, that is, and if they know there is a crow nest nearby, you can do a very, very targeted approach so that the immediately adjacent nest might be targeted by one of the farming community. So do what we can to do the right thing, but it's a very tricky subject.
The other thing I know that is true is that the success rate of the chicks getting away increases massively the further sort of out into the middle of the valley that they are, because the predators are so much more successful at getting the chicks or the eggs where they are relatively close to perching posts and tree lines and things like that. So there's definitely things that can be done to prevent the certainly from the birds, preventing them from perching, so they kind of sit and watch. And there probably is more that could be done to create sort of slightly more open landscapes in which the curlews breed. I've got a couple of other ones about the predators and the predation, and then I'll switch topics. So one of them, again, is quite a practical question, but are the nests at greater risk of predation of the chicks sort of after hatching, or is it more of an issue of the eggs before hatching?
Amy, do you want to take that?
Sorry, could you just repeat the end of that question?
Yeah. So basically, are the do the predators, are they more likely to kill them when they're eggs or when they're chicks?
Okay. So it's both basically. It depends what the predator is better at hunting and finding. So if it finds a nest, then it'll go after eggs. And I would say that more things probably eat eggs than eat chicks. I've not really heard of sheep eating live chicks. But obviously, eggs are really nutritious to anything. I'm sure a lot of us all eat eggs, and it's a lot of protein, and it's a really sort of high energy meal for a predator. So eggs would probably be the more popular choice. And obviously, the benefit with eggs is that they can't run away. There's no small bones. It's easier to digest. That said, eggs don't really move, and if they've got an adult bird sat on top of them, then that can be a deterrent for some, not all, but some predators. And yeah, the chicks are attended by the adult, so the adult will often sort of perch on a post and keep an eye out for predators, and sort of call to the chicks to warn them when they need to sort of duck down into the grass. But they are sort of left exposed. They don't have a parent bird sat on top of them all the time that may be able to fend off a cow or a sheep that's getting too close.
So obviously, one of the things, I've just been out in Lancashire today, and I'm seeing, thought it would be this lovely, but lots and lots of lapwing aerial displays where lapwings are actually ganging up against the crows, and where they outnumber them, they can fight them off or they can distract them. They do sort of distraction flights, don't they? Do curlews do that as well? Yeah,
they can do. They can be quite feisty, as I'm sure you see many animal mothers being very feisty over their broods. And I've seen videos of a curlew chasing away a huge sheep that got too close to its nest. So they will try and fight them off, but there's definitely a sort of pattern of how much the parent will invest into defending its young. So if it's very early in the egg stage, the parent won't defend the eggs that much because it knows it still has time to go away and lay more eggs and incubate them. And obviously the thing to remember as well is, whilst the curlew wants to protect its eggs and protect its young, its number one priority is to stay alive. So if a predator is mobbing it and it's looking like it's in danger of hurting the bird, then the bird will just abandon the nest and fly away.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think maybe we ought to ask Barney to unmute and describe some of the sort of crow dog fights that he's been witnessing.
Hi, folks. Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we're finding curlew nests is by spotting where the crows are. And the poor curlews are having dogfights like World War I fighter pilot battles with the crows over the nest sites. And to be fair, they seem to do a very good job at it. I mean, it must take some energy and all that, but they do seem to win. I mean, touch wood, our six nests in the valley are all still there, and the dogfights have calmed down, and yeah, I think they're doing okay. Yeah, we talked about crow control earlier. We have been doing some very targeted crow control, and I think it's been quite effective in supporting these birds. So I think we don't do a lot, but we do very targeted crow control, and it seems to be pretty effective.
Thanks, Barney. The other question that's come in, which is sort of on a related theme, is talked about the electric fencing, and there was a little bit of concern about what does the electric fencing do to the the very young hatched curlew chicks. So can you reassure us that they're not stumbling out, taking their first sort of Bambi-eyed steps in the world, and then getting electrocuted on the electric fences?
It's interesting, isn't it? We fenced a nest the other day, and we retreated back to we had a telescope trained on the nest before we started, and we retreated back to the 300 or 400 meters, got the telescope on, and within 15 minutes the adult bird had sort of walked all the way around the nest and thought, how am I going to get in here? And had just popped over the nest, over the fence, and back on the nest within 15 minutes. So the adults learn very quickly. For some reason, feathered animals, birds, don't seem to get electrocuted. I think the feathers insulate them. So the fence doesn't seem to be an issue. They learn to hop over it, and we haven't actually got to the chick stage with electric fences. We hope to this year. We got all our fingers and toes crossed. But it's not an issue. It is a good way and a proven way of protecting the birds.
Great, thanks.
They certainly wouldn't be electrocuted, and they could probably get underneath the chicks are kind of tiny, and they would get underneath the electric fence. But the ambition is to remove the fence pretty sharpish once the nest is hatched.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The bottom wire is at 20 centimeters, so they can probably sneak underneath it, but it doesn't matter if they touch it.
Thanks very much, Barney. So we've got a couple of questions which I think are linked, which is sort of just widening this out a little bit. So I'll ask them both together, and then you can decide who wants to take them. So Catherine asks, what about the long term in terms of working with the wider farming community, maybe just beyond this project? And then a separate question we had about whether part of the solution was around sort of changes to farming policy, and I guess you could put farming subsidy into that as well, and also forestry policy.
So national policy at present does not include payment for curlew nests, but DEFRA nationally and this government nationally are very much on board with the devastating declines in curlew numbers. And so we are anticipating that there will be future measures and future sympathetic policies which help everybody and help curlews. In terms of the long term for this project, some of the immediate term things that we hope to get involved in, I've talked about how little we know about our curlews. I've talked about how much we're still learning. One of the things we would love to do in the future is to ring some of the birds, and maybe to put rings on chicks. And if we were to have colour rings or bird rings, rings as in bangles on the legs, then we would be able to get some real information about where our birds are going, where they're resighted, and so forth. What has happened elsewhere in the country, and what is increasingly happening in the world of ornithology, is that people are using very, very tiny GPS trackers and effectively gluing them onto birds. And the GPS trackers will sort of last for about a month. And then as the bird's feathers grow, they will naturally drop off through preening or through the growth of feathers. And so you can collect way more information from GPS tracking. And it would be absolutely brilliant if we could get involved in either bird ringing or GPS tracking to understand an awful lot more about our birds. And the more information we have about our birds, the better able we are to understand how to help them. I think personally, if we can get through the next decade or so, I believe that there will be changes in policy and practices that will support curlews. And I think it might be that some of the opportunities to continue to work with farmers are enhanced and supported in the future. So personally, I think if we can help our curlews survive through the next 10 to 15 years, I'm hopeful that future policies will also help them, and that by which I mean will help the farming community to help them.
I've just seen there's a couple of just a comment from Keith in the chat, and I just wanted to say I totally agree to you. Farmers and gamekeepers are a huge part of the team, and they will continue being a huge part of the team. And nothing that we can't achieve anything if we don't have the farmers helping us, and we're very, very grateful for all of their help. The predator control is a huge issue, and we do, as we were saying, bits and bobs, but at the moment the predator that we're most concerned about destroying the nests is the silage cutters. So if the nests get mown, if we don't find the nests and they get mown over, then the predators won't be able to get anything, because the nests will be certainly destroyed by the farm machinery. And what we're also doing at the moment is gathering evidence about which predators are taking the eggs, and how we can best start doing predator control, so that we're not just doing random killing of crows or foxes if it's not going to make an impact on the threat of predation.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I have been on the RSPB website actually looking at their position on it, and I think there is an understanding that where it's sort of properly licensed and properly following the rules, that actually, predator control is part of what is sometimes needed. So I think that is part of it is part of the solution. As you say, it's got to kind of be done in the right way. So I think it's interesting to look at. If you're interested, have a look at the RSPB website, because I think it's probably a slightly more balanced position than some of you might automatically assume. Good. So, well, thank you very much. I think that's most of the questions answered. I'd just like to make another plug. If you have been inspired by tonight, and I think the really interesting, detailed work that's going on here, very targeted, working, as we say, with all our volunteers and working with the farming community, then there's a link to donate on. We've had a question about donations again. So basically saying, can the donations be targeted to the partnership's work with Curlews? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. So if you go on the website, you follow the link, that is exactly what this is. This is the targeted for this specific project. And as I say, that's really helped this get off the ground last year, and enabled us to carry on this year. So absolutely, the answer to that question is yes. Brilliant. So I'll just have a quick flick through. I can see some more comments. So just
a point on that, Tom, about the funding.
Yeah.
One of those thermal loggers that we talked about, every one of those loggers is about £68. Electric fence equipment, £500 or more for 2 fences. So the work that we're doing, we're putting a lot of cash into a dozen curlew nests, but I've explained why I feel that's important. So your donations will help us. It will help us understand the birds better, and it will help us protect the birds better.
Yeah, great, thank you. A massive thanks again to Amy and Susanna. Thanks to Barney for joining our expert panel. Slightly impromptu, and thank you for all those who volunteered on this project or involved, if you're a member of the farming community, or if you've donated. And please come and join us again for more of our talks. Thanks very much.